Good afternoon and welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. I was just about to host for the boss man there who just popped up. We were worried, Paul John, we weren't sure if you were going to make it.
Well, I would never leave you two guys alone just to chew the fat. I did that at the weekend, Chris, and I'll tell you something, you
Always being
handled it.
abandoned.
You handled it very, very well. I tried my best to help you out, but we just, for some reason, couldn't get in
I know.
on the stream at the weekend. But of course, we will be talking about the weekend and we'll be talking about the forthcoming match against Dundee United. Patrick, I've not heard anything from you in relation to the League Cup final yet. Obviously, Chris covered it live, emotionally and everything else. What was your overall take on it? And obviously, we'll talk about the aftermath as well.
I mean, I was at the game. I was I was in the sort of main stand. I don't know if that's the term for Hampden, but it's the stand that the team comes out of and all that. And had a pretty good view. I was relatively high up, so um, thought it was a very strange performance. First 10 minutes, I thought we looked really really comfortable, and then we sort of slowed down. We found it hard to sort of play through. We just sort of ended up stringing it round the back, and I thought, to be fair, Rangers had actually set up quite well defensively. They weren't quite pressing us, but they were sort of in our faces all the time. And I think you seen with the first goal, the Taylor mistake, they were always sort of ready to pounce when we made a mistake. So obviously, you go into half time, you think, that half's actually flown in, but we really need to turn this around. We need to get the next goal. We do turn it around, and at 2-1, I'm thinking we are flying here. We could maybe make this 3-1 or 4-1 and sort of wrap it up. And then sort of the game just sort of descends into chaos at 2-2. I think we go on and win it. I'm celebrating like mad. And then, of course, I think the players also thought they'd won it. And it's 3-3. And I thought at that point, this could be 4-4, 5-5 and head to penalties. I was certain it was heading to penalties at that stage because the game just would not end. Both teams kept on fighting back. I thought in extra time, I didn't think we were sort of vintage, but I thought we were by far and away the better team. They tired very quickly in extra time. And then in penalties, I mean, you're never confident. There's a lot of luck involved in penalties, but I thought with Kasper Schmeichel as our goalie, I thought we stand, if I'm a betting man, I would probably go for Celtic here. And luckily he pulled it off. I think he saved it at the right time as well, sort of towards the end of the shootout. So, I mean, stress was probably the one constant throughout the 3 hours I was in Hampden. So I wouldn't say I enjoyed the game, but I certainly enjoyed the result and celebrations. And then, unlike Billy, who phoned up Radio Clyde on Monday night, I actually had a great family outing after the game. We went to Pisano in the Glasgow City Centre, so I had a great wee family day out after the football. But after some of these games when it's been a bit tense or maybe you've not even been the better team and you go on to win, you say it's really satisfying. I wouldn't describe this one as satisfying. I was stressed the full 180 minutes or whatever it was it took, but absolutely delighted to go over the line, and I count myself quite lucky to be in attendance for what was a classic cup final, I would say.
See that that thing, the classic cup final. Chris, I'm going to throw that over to you because I find it really difficult because you're in the moment to appreciate whether or not it is a classic. I know there was 6 goals. It went to penalties and all this stuff, the to-in and the fro-in. And I heard it by the commentators. I heard it mentioned by the commentators a few times. Oh, it's a classic. This is a classic cup final and all that. As a Celtic fan, it's hard to appreciate the fact that it could be a classic because you're so emotionally involved in the game, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that's just by virtue of being a supporter of one of the teams. The old cliche is that it was a great one for the neutrals, and it absolutely, I think, looking back on it, absolutely was. I mean, it had everything. It had contentious decisions, which I'm sure we'll get to. It had, it had goals. It had incidents. It had drama. It had the heroics at the end during a penalty shootout, which is always a lottery. I mean, it was. Looking back on it was great, but I was the same as Patrick and probably yourself. I know you were with the guys at Bad, so I can imagine how tense the atmosphere probably was at points there. In here, I was literally sitting on this couch behind me with my wife watching it, and the dog, the child, probably the neighbours, would have realised when we'd scored that last penalty, because I think I nearly went through the roof. And it wasn't just the fact that I'm a huge Celtic fan and I want to enjoy and watch my team win. But I was also realised I was likely to be hosting the post-match show immediately afterwards, and I thought, the difference between hosting that after that kind of win or potentially a loss is, as we know, night and day. But I have to say, I've got to give credit to everybody that commented, everybody that stuck with me on the show after the game. The guys were not only were they very gracious about the fact I was kind of on my own, but the comments the guys were making were fantastic, and it made the show went really, really quick for me. I actually quite enjoyed doing it, even though I was a bit stressed about it beforehand. But yeah, the game itself, I think it'll probably be remembered. I would hope for some of the right reasons, but the way this media furore is happening at the moment, there's a good chance that this game's going to be remembered for a lot of the wrong reasons, and I think that actually is the tragic element of the game. So, while we'd like to view it as a classic, there seems to be intent from certain parties to turn this into a notorious game rather than a classic.
Well, this is the thing, and this is the aftermath that we're talking about, Chris. It's all the focus has been on one decision, Patrick. And I'm going to raise three today that seem to have gone under the radar, don't get a mention, and the absolute commitment by some quarters of the media to absolutely and completely focus on one incident involving Liam Scales and a jersey pool. You take your hat off to the commitment. It's unbelievable. I mean, they're still going on about it 3 days later. Like you say, the fella Billy phoning in, the phone-ins have been dominated with this chat. They have been demonstrating their frustrations by demanding that the game is replayed and all this absolute gibberish, right? So there are other decisions that went under the radar. We're going to be talking about some of those as the show goes on. In relation to the mentality, Patrick, we go on about mentality. We use the word so often, the winning mentality, that sometimes it sounds almost just like a go-to default phrase. But a big part of that victory at the weekend came down to Celtic's winning mentality. Brendan Rodgers' winning mentality. The fact that Callum McGregor refuses to lose a cup final. It just doesn't happen if Callum McGregor's playing. And that mentality is something that it's embedded in the Celtic side. It's not something you can just flick on the switch. Okay, guys, we're going to have a winning mentality. You build it over a period of domination, and that's exactly what we have. That was huge at the weekend for me, Patrick.
Yeah, it was, and you seen the full team going over to Greg Taylor after the first goal, sort of giving him a pat in the back, sort of try to cheer him up, and it's clear that the squad sticks together. That obviously Callum McGregor, and you can include James Forrest in that, probably Kasper Schmeichel. These guys are so experienced, and they're absolute winners. They've got such a strong mentality. You hear it, the post-match interviews that they do on the pitch. Just stick to your own game, keep trying to play through, get back in the game, sort of keep that sort of level head, and know that if we play our way, we will get there eventually. So to demonstrate that sort of calmness and that sort of, as you say, mentality it's an incredible quality to have, and it's obviously something that only one side has, because this is a story that has repeated and repeated since for 8.5 years, since the Phoenix sort of rose from the ashes in 2016 back into the top league, and Brendan Rodgers first came to Celtic. Just apart from that sort of one COVID season where there was so many variables and differences, the other 7.5 years, it's just been the sort of same old story, really. Celtic winning in all sorts of different ways, either 5-1s or 3-3 then penalties. We always seem to get over the line. And obviously, Callum McGregor is sort of the example of that. Going back to when Scott Brown left and went to Aberdeen in 2021, I think Callum was the obvious choice for captain, but I think there's maybe doubts about, can he fulfil the sort of mentality role, the sort of leadership role that Scott Brown leaves. I think he's a better player. I think a lot of people would say that. Very good at dictating the play and controlling the game, but he stepped into that leadership role really, really well, sort of on and off the park. And I don't doubt this is something that Brendan Rodgers and even Neil Lennon bring in and instill into this side. I think Neil Lennon maybe even spoke about it a few days ago, about it's only until you go elsewhere you realise how difficult it is to install that winning mentality, and it's just sort of something that's inbuilt at Celtic, because it's always been there. There's always been that demand and drive to win. But it's definitely a quality that we possess, and I think it's safe to say that they don't. And I reckon it's been the difference on quite a number of occasions. It's not something tangible. You can't look at statistics around this sort of thing. There's no sort of transfer fees or wages behind it. But I think, any football fan can see that there's a massive difference in mentality between the two sides.
I think the people who have spoken to us recently about it, going to other clubs, Chris, you'd have been present at some of these interviews, were Charlie Mulgrew and Joe Ledley, talking about, going down south after being at Celtic and going to reasonably sized clubs, but not having the same mentality, and people thinking that draws are acceptable and all this and on league duty. Whereas if it happens up in Celtic, then it's a disaster. And I think that it's huge. And a big part of that for me, Chris, and I keep going back to it, and there is a whole point to it today in relation to the Glasgow Cup final yesterday. Celtic were eventually defeated 3-2 by a Rangers B team that had quite a few first-team players in it. I don't know if they're going to count that as the 119th trophy. I'm not sure. But the reason I bring it up is that Daniel Cummins scored yet another goal. He's 18 years of age. He's now scored 24 goals in 24 games, right? Be that against first-team opposition at Rangers or in the UEFA Champions Youth League or in the B team. Yet, still no contract offer. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up is because having an instilled mentality at a football club often comes from the core group of players who have been at that football club, Chris, since they were 8 or 9 years of age. Yeah. And, they've had that woven into their psyche since they were youth players at the football club. And they know by the time they break into the football club what's expected. And I think it's important that we should look at the next generation coming through, because we will absolutely and quite rightly laud the achievements of Jamesy Forrest and Callum McGregor. Unbelievable when you look at their trophies that they've won at Celtic, 23 and 25 respectively. But where's the next wave of homegrown talent? Daniel Cummins, surely is football getting so complicated that at 18, if you score 24 and 24, you don't get a chance because there's some other data somewhere that suggests that you're not good enough?
It does boggle the mind a little bit. I mean, those numbers, just taken in isolation, should be enough for you think to give them a shot. Give them a chance. There must be something there. There has to be something there, right? I mean, I know that's what strikers get paid for, but a lot of footballers and ex-footballers will say that's the hardest job in football, is to put the ball in the back of the net, especially under pressure. Now, okay, he's playing at youth level, he's playing at B team level, but the pressure to put the ball in the net is still there, surely. And what you want to do is give the kid a chance to see how he bears up against top level opposition, how he bears up with the level of expectation that's set at our club on players. And yeah, you're 100% right. You mentioned ex-players, the way they talk. We're meeting one tomorrow night, Peter Grant, who was actually referenced by John Collins, just to replicate your name drop there. But John Collins mentioned and actually himself name dropped Peter Grant about he's the type of player that you need in the dressing room, in the Celtic dressing room, not just for what he does on the pitch, but for what he brings in terms of that mentality. He was a winner. He was someone that it was in his mind, if he didn't get a win, if you got a draw or you got a loss, you drop points or you didn't play well, he took it personally. And that's what you get when you bring these kids through who are, part of the foundation of the club. We're all Celtic fans. We would go out onto that park given the opportunity and give it 110% and play until, our legs fell off. That's how we feel about our club. And I think you need to have that core within the club, within the player pool. Now, Daniel Cummins is just one player of several who, are coming through the ranks that way. But they seem to be hitting this stone ceiling at the moment that they just can't seem to break through. And I don't understand. We don't have insight into, the inner workings of the club. We don't know why they can't seem to make it. But when you're putting up that numbers, surely the question has to be asked. At what point do we look at a player that's putting up those kind of goal scoring numbers and say, all right, do you know what? There's an opportunity to take up the third choice striker, or maybe, just get him onto the bench for a cup game, something. Give him the opportunity, right? Sometimes it can't all just be down to what you see in training. Sometimes you have to put these guys in to see if they sink or swim. And it's up to the player then to take the opportunity. But, I mean, 24 and 24? Goodness me, when was the last time we produced those kind of numbers, albeit at the youth level? I'm not sure we've done that for years.
No, yeah, I mean, back in the day, you used to read about these kids coming through in the Celtic View. They would always cover the reserve and the youth teams, and you knew about a goal scorer because it's so obvious. You know what I mean? It's difficult to know if a defender's playing well, but you knew about a goal scorer coming through the ranks. And is it too simplistic, Patrick, to suggest that here's a kid that's scoring goals, 18 years of age, give the boy a chance? I mean, we're playing Dundee United. It's going to be a tough enough game at the weekend, away from home. They've done really well this season, sitting fifth, I think, in the table. But he's 18, and you think to yourself, right, what other strikers have we brought through around the same age? Mark Burchill, you know, we threw him into games against Rangers and he scored goals. Let's try him out. I'm going to link it into the Dane Murray story this morning as well, which I think then links into a Stephen Welsh story. But you know, the point remains, Patrick, if we've got to have a winning mentality, you can buy it in. I do think you can buy it in. I think you can buy it in with players like Joe Hart and players like Kasper Schmeichel. You know, these people that just click into that way of thinking and that approach to the game, and then that mentality. But you do need to have a core group. And, you know, it seems as though we've lost a few over the years. Is Daniel Cummins going to be the next one? As I say, he's out of contract. And he can speak to clubs on the 1st of January, and he's not yet received a contract offer. He's not even been spoken to by the club yet. So what are we now, 12 days until he can speak to other clubs? And he has got a lot of interest through his exploits in the Champions League youth games as well, Patrick. What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's disappointing that we've not entered into negotiations. It's as if we're sort of off the ball or something. We've taken your eye off him, which I find that hard to believe because, you know, the last month or two, all the goals that he's scoring, the rate at which he's scoring the goals, it's broken through onto Twitter and sort of different social media just how on fire he is at the moment. I think we heard Brendan say a month or two ago, you know, if I deem a player good enough, he will get a chance. It's not like I'm not looking that way. I think it was probably after the Rocco Vata, Bosun Lawal leaving to England situation. Daniel Kelly as well, obviously left in the summer. You know, maybe Brendan has really high standards for his youth players, but it does seem quite baffling that a guy with 24 and 24 wouldn't get a chance. That's not even counting assists. I'm sure he's got a few assists in there as well. I sort of speculated earlier in the year that maybe there's some sort of mentality issue. I know there's quite a big focus on Man United and sort of Roy Keane goes into all this on Sky and stuff that, you know, these are guys who have been paid a very large sum of money. They've yet to make a competitive appearance. They're walking in with sort of designer gear, designer cars. You know, maybe that's the case at Celtic. These guys think they've made it. They think they're entitled to games. You know, I'm not there. I don't know what their mentality is. But I think if they're working hard and they're scoring goals, it would appear Daniel Cummings is doing that. I think they should be given a chance. And I think these upcoming games, you know, looking at the games, they're not easy games. No game is easy. But when you look at the few weeks that we've had past, we've had Aberdeen away, we've had Club Brugge at home, Zagreb away, a League Cup final against Rangers. Looking forward, you know, Tannadice, it won't be an easy game, but you look at the fixtures that we've got coming up. We've got no winter break. There's a lot of games where, you know, you'd expect us to win, and there's a chance to maybe rotate the squad. I think looking at the game at the weekend, obviously we've played 120 minutes. Guys will be tired. I think Hatate looks a bit tired. I think other players, maybe McGregor could do with a rest. Johnston, sort of, he picked up a knock and he's maybe not at his best as well. There's a lot of guys who could do with a bit of rotation, and I think it's a good chance to sort of blood in these youngsters and, you know, hopefully we will enter into negotiations because to let yet another talent slip through the net, I think would be quite disappointing. And, you know, looking down to England, I was quite defensive of the club when it came to Ben Doak because there's only so much we can offer these players. Ben Doak came into the side, I think he came off the bench 3 games in a row, one of which was against Rangers. And, you know, he looked good. He looked, you know, fast, sort of skillful. And we did offer him a new deal, and he went down to Liverpool anyway because they can pay a youth player 20 grand a week, whereas we can't. If we're paying Ben Doak 20 grand a week, you're going to have about 30, 40 guys knocking on the door asking for new deals. So it's very hard to keep a hold of our players in that sense when England's right next door. But it'd be good to see these guys get a chance because, I don't want to say regardless of mentality because, attitude and mentality, you have to foster the right environment in a dressing room. You have to work hard. But I think 24 goals in 24 games, Daniel Kelly is quite clearly working hard and is a good player. So it'd be good to see him get a chance over these next few weeks and hopefully we can keep a hold of him.
Yeah, this is a big thing. You don't know. You simply don't know what's happening behind the scenes, Patrick. That, I absolutely take that on board. And it's a very simplistic view that I've got, 24 and 24. Surely you give them a chance, If not, why are we producing footballers if we don't give them a chance? And my frustration here, and we listed 13 players who had left the football club in recent times who had come through the ranks, and arguably none of them had really smashed it, although Ben Doak obviously would be the exception to that. I think, even though he's playing in Middlesbrough, I would not be surprised if come January he gets a move to the Premiership or even further afield. I think there's teams elsewhere looking at him. And he's obviously now a bit of a regular in the Scotland national team as well. So Ben Doak's maybe the outlier, but the rest of them, yeah, you might be getting a game for QPR or similar kind of championship style clubs. But have you really smashed it since you left Celtic? Probably not. And the thing with Cummins is, until you see him in the first team, you really don't know. So we will see, and we'll be watching that with interest. But we've not finished with the game at the weekend yet, Chris, because obviously there is an incredible meltdown that we discussed yesterday. And we also spoke about how sensational the turnaround has been. And we were trying to gauge when this happened, right? So you've got a team who had some kind of world intergalactic record for not conceding penalty kicks domestically, right? What was it, 75 games or something? About 100 games conceding a pit. Unbelievable. I mean, the chances of that happening, right? And obviously, they were top of the league when it came to penalties awarded. Some would argue that because they're a very attacking side, they're going to win more penalties than other teams. That's right. Celtic are the same. But this season, they've not had a single penalty domestically. So something has changed. Something has changed. And I was trying to pinpoint it, Chris, and I think it does go back to the jibe made by Brendan Rodgers about incompetent refereeing, which obviously was pulled over the hot coals at the SFA. Disciplined. Did he get a couple of game ban? Was it suspended?
I think so. It was one game and then one suspended for later or something. I can't remember. Yeah.
Seems to have changed since then, though. And obviously, we're not party to what was said by Nick DeMarco in that disciplinary, but it makes you wonder because it's almost as if Celtic finally grew a set, stood up to the Beaks, and said, "Listen, we're going to scrutinise you to within an inch of yourselves every single time there's an issue," and it seems as though they've bucked up their ideas, Chris. I mean, we're now in a situation where Rangers fans are screaming corruption and cheating and all that kind of stuff. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Well, I've supported one of the two Glasgow clubs my entire life, and of those two clubs, I believe there was only one that was actually formally charged and actually faced sanctions for confirmed cheating. Is that right? And by the way, it wasn't the one I support. So, look. My view on this is, look, referees are not infallible. VAR is not infallible, right? VAR was brought in to augment what is an already difficult job by referees. The action that I think Celtic took previously when Brendan, was punished for speaking out, it wasn't to say, we're Celtic, give us all the decisions. It was to say, look, there are fundamental mistakes being made. We're highlighting them because they're costing us points. What we want is a better standard. Now, you'd like to look at, our rivals across the water and say, is that what they're doing? But it's not. They're annoyed because one singular, isolated decision on a game full of contentious decisions that could have either favoured or hampered either side did not go their way. It's classic chucking the toys out the pram behaviour, and it's sad and funny in equal measure. Now, look, I think referees should face scrutiny for decisions that they get wrong. I don't think it should involve abuse or targeting their families or any nonsense like that. Absolutely not. That's absolutely beyond ridiculous. I also think, accusing them of bias, we could all do it until, we're blue in the face or green in the face or wherever you want to go. The point is, what we want transparency into how decisions are made. Now, this decision that's caused all this furore, over the past few days, I have seen about 15 different interpretations of the rules based on such incredibly fine margins that for me, it's understandable. Some people are saying, yeah, it's a penalty. Some people are saying, no, it's not a penalty. Some people are throwing in factors like there's a foul before it. Some people are saying, well, it's got to be just this point. Look, however you want to interpret it, the decision was made on the field. It was made at a point when the game was finally balanced. The fact is that the two teams still had plenty of minutes and plenty of time to play. And you know what? One team won, the other team didn't. Move on. Move on, right? I'm sorry. We're the champions. You're going to have another couple of chances for the next X amount of years. Congratulations, you upped your game. Do you know what? Just get off your soapbox and just deal with it like adult, mature human beings, right? And the fact is, I agree with you. I think the fact that we're not seeing quite the same amount of blatant, frustrating decisions by officials is a sign that they've actually improved. But let's make this very clear: they've not improved for the benefit of Celtic. They're improving for the benefit of Scottish football. I think Willie Collum has actually come in, and I think he has made changes. That's my interpretation. None of us know, because none of us are privy to what goes on in these meeting rooms. But the point is, it doesn't mean that every decision is going to be 100% accurate. Referees are human beings. The rules are written like, God, I don't know, written in wingdings as far as I can interpret them sometimes. But the point is, the referees are there to do a really difficult job, right? They do
Took a wee minute for that one to land there, Chris, but I like it.
But they're doing a difficult job. They're never going to keep everybody happy. Something we have to absorb. I think in the past there's been cases where we can, call out decisions that clearly make no sense. But do you know what? Eventually it dies down and it goes away. But this time, I've never seen this level of vitriol being thrown at a governing body, being thrown at an individual, being thrown at opposition fans. And do you know what? I'll say this, right? As adult human beings, we can be frustrated with decisions at any point in life. But see the point where to score points, you start throwing out the old trope of weaponising child exploitation and child abuse. I'm sorry, any attempts you've got at having high ground, you're gone. You are gone, right? So there's a certain mob in this city that need to take a long, hard look at themselves in the mirror and say, really, a football game? And that's your argument?
That's your default.
That's your argument. That's your default fallback position. Do better.
Yeah, it's an instant block. I mean, these people, they walk among us, unfortunately, Patrick. Thankfully, we've not had many of them in the comment section this week. It's been quite a psychedelic week, which is why I was really, really tight in coming into the show today, because I've got some crazy viral fever. So 1 minute, I'm absolutely lucid. Next minute, I think I'm hallucinating. So there you go. If it gets a bit psychedelic during the show, that's the reason for it. Jungle Live, they cheated for over a decade. There's the irony of it, JL, and it's great to see you. There are a few decisions I want to go over in relation to that game. Chris mentioned Willie Collum, and the story is, Patrick, and I say it's a story because there's no confirmation of this, but the Scotsman ran a claim that Willie Collum has discussed the game, and in particular the Scalesy penalty incident, with the new CEO, Patrick Stewart, who was immortalised yesterday on Liam Carrigan's Christmas jumper. Collum has apparently admitted, apparently I say, because obviously this is a newspaper story and there's no quotes in it, that the VAR officials made an error in not recommending a review in relation to the Scales incident. So this is running in a paper, but even that, if you want to look at this particular situation, Patrick, why is this information being leaked to a newspaper? Because obviously it's knowledge to the reporter, Alan Paciullo, who's ran the story, who's given him the information. Why is it being run in a newspaper before it's coming out as an official SFA statement, for example, or the Willie Collum review show that he does, I think, once a month, which apparently is going to happen at some point this week. So it's been leaked to the newspaper deliberately. Again, that instantly puts a wee bit of pressure on the SFA because they've already been told what they've admitted to. But that apparently is an admission of error. If that does come out, if you think that people are going into meltdown now, Patrick, it's going to go tenfold. It's going to be meteoric, isn't it? What do you make of that though? Because again, they're not backing up their officials. They're blaming it on the VAR team, and they're saying, okay, Rangers should have had a penalty, if indeed that story is true.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that is true. Obviously that that VAR review show probably couldn't come soon enough for the SFA and the SPFL. But I mean, you're right. They're sort of throwing their VAR team under the bus when it comes to the sort of baying mob that are just keen to criticise anyone and everyone. We've all had a great laugh at the talk of civil court actions and badgering SFA sponsors with all sorts of emails and phone calls. I'm sure that will work. I'd love people to spend their time to doing that. I'm sure that will have an impact. But it's what happens when you deal with a rogue entity like them. You end up with leaks to the press after private conversations. Following public criticism. There's no winning when you're dealing with a sort of angry entity like that who think they are the superior force in Scottish football and haven't been for a very, very long time. But I mean, in terms of the VAR team, as we've seen in I don't know if people have seen this, but it was led by Alan Muir and assisted by Frank Connor. And Alan Muir was the man on the goal line in the Scottish Cup semi-final in 2015 when Josh Meekings handled the ball against Lee Griffiths, which I think is probably one of the most famous refereeing mistakes of the last 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, we would have went 2-0 up, effectively in the final against Falkirk, and Ronnie Dyler would have won a fourth treble for Celtic. And we'd be sitting here with 9 trebles instead of 8, you'd assume. So, to say that this is some sort of Celtic-related conspiracy, I think is nonsense at best. If you believe it isn't, if you believe it's a penalty, it's maybe incompetence at best. Again, it's doubtful whether it is a penalty because I think Scales fouls him outside the box, and then as he sort of approaches the line of the 18-yard box, he grabs his jersey. I still don't really believe that that's a penalty. I don't think that's a very strong case, but it's entirely possible they've reviewed it and said, look, the original foul that you'd have to pull it back for is outside the box. Yep. So there's no point in having an on-field review. It's a perfectly reasonable decision, in my opinion. So, the SFA and SPFL were quick to release a statement about pyrotechnics the day after the game. For whatever reason, they're dragging their heels and they're letting Rangers fans, certain sports journalists in the media define the narrative about this one decision. I mean, I've not seen much chat from the mainstream media about the fact that Balogun could have been sent off about 3 times, yes, or that there were 4-1, 4v1 on goal in the 51st minute and should have been out of sight, if they were a quality football team. Or the fact that they could have missed a penalty, or Celtic could have made it 4-4, or there was a penalty shootout following that. There's all sorts of different variables that happened in this game, but we're choosing to focus on this one issue because it suits the narrative of this one club who constantly throw the toys out the pram. So I think, all this fallout that seems to happen every time that they're upset about a decision leaks to the press and all this. The SFA and the SPFL, I know it's the SFA are in charge of refereeing, but it was an SPFL competition, so I'm not sure, who this falls on. But the quicker that, Willie Collum and the relevant authorities come out and sort of put their stamp on things, the better, because it's now Wednesday afternoon, and it's just rumbled on for too long, and it's not fair on referees and people involved to have this sort of nationwide criticism for what was a pretty bog standard decision.
I agree with you 100%, and I've said it since the moment I've seen it. That's how I viewed the situation, Patrick, William Scales. I thought it was an earlier infringement, which was the free kick. And if that was what John Beaton believed, right, and they look back on it, why go back on their decision? This is the thing. So it's going to go one of two ways, Chris. It is either going to be, as the Scotsmen have suggested, an admission of error. As I say, I think they're playing the game there and making the leak so that it puts the pressure on the SFA to do that. Or indeed, they're going to back up the ref and say he got it right. Either way, it's going to infuriate one side of Glasgow. Now, in relation to the other decisions, the ones that I am going to pinpoint, start off with Balogun. Now, by the way, this is the thing, going back to what we mentioned yesterday and today, Chris, about Celtic finally stepping up, right? You'll remember Balogun a year ago, December 2023, being sent off. I think he skived Dyson Maeda. And as he's walking up the tunnel, he spits at a Celtic fan.
That's right.
Right? And people are going on about, right, it's an energy, one of the energy things that you need to do that with, right? And he spat that, right, okay, but he spat in the direction of the Celtic fan. The Celtic fan who was standing there actually contacted us directly and said, listen, I seen it 100%. He spat over in the direction of a Celtic fan. Didn't hit the Celtic fan, but he did spit at him, right? So we put that out there, and obviously there was a wee bit of a meltdown in relation to that as well. And we asked the club, what are you going to do about it? You can't have Rangers players spitting on our fans. I mean, that's proper youth Liverpool antics, right? And I was told then, I'll get back to you on Monday. 12 months later, still not had the response. So that's frustrating when the club don't stand up for the fans, the players, the manager, etc. And I think we finally have done. And that was my point, Chris. We finally did. When Brendan Rodgers came out, full of emotion after the game, called the referee incompetent, Celtic backed him up. And that is why, full credit to the club for doing that. And I do think there's been a sea change since then.
Yeah, I think the club should always look I think certainly they should always represent the fans' best interests. I think that goes without saying. And that for me would have been a clear safety issue, the spitting incident. So for me, they absolutely should have dealt with that. And they don't have a responsibility to come back to us, but they should have taken proactive action on that. I agree with you in terms of I think it was right for the club to back Brendan Rodgers' position. I think you should always back a manager, particularly when a manager comes out right after a game and speaks like that. Understand the emotion that managers are going through. And to be fair, maybe Rangers will do the same thing with Clement, as his phone's blowing up with all the texts about the penalty and stuff like that. But hopefully they'll get someone to administrate his text messages, whoever that was. I'm pretty sure it was just coming from Billy for Super Scoreboard. It was probably just the one texting him 3 million times. That was a penalty. But I think, look, we're not. It's like I said, we're not as a club, and I think no club should act this way. As a club, when you back your manager in that position, you're not saying, we're not happy with the entire refereeing standard and bodies. What we're saying is that performance wasn't good enough. This can cost us over the course of a season. We back our manager, we back his position, we back the fact that he spoke his mind. Perfectly happy to sit down with you and, tell us how can we improve the standard of the refereeing in this country so that we avoid all these accusations of bias, so we avoid all these, this continual scrutiny, and so that we avoid, one referee getting put in and one side has a meltdown and the other, that kind of thing. All we're asking for is work with us, be transparent, tell us why that decision was made. Why are we wrong to challenge that decision? Why are we wrong to speak up about a refereeing performance or, that decision or this decision? All the SFA have to do is come out and say, do you know what? Here's what we're doing in terms of refereeing. Here's the rule book. This is how the rule was applied. This is where, maybe the dubiety comes in. But you know what? It was a decision that we backed the referee on at the end of the season. But, appreciate your challenge. Fine, thanks. Way to go. But this stance, leaking stuff to the press, saying, look, we were right. They're going to back down. If that proves to be true, and Willie Collum or whoever the body or the forum is that's going to make this decision, if it transpires that this is true and they're back down and they give an apology for that, that's setting a very dangerous precedent for refereeing going forward. Yep. It's setting a hugely dangerous precedent going forward, and one that will be subject to exploitation. It'll be subject to accusations. It'll be subject to, the most ridiculous level of scrutiny across all the different platforms, and it will just continue to build this huge divide, which is, which is ridiculous. What the SFA should do, in my opinion, is they should back the referee, but they should back it in the most human manner possible by saying, referee was refereeing a game that was going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. A lot of the decisions were difficult to make. However, he applied the rules as he saw fit. The VAR team applied the rules as they saw fit. Doesn't mean that we're necessarily all going to get it 100% copacetic to what the one side or the other wants. But the fact is, that was the decisions that were made. We trust the referee's ability. End of story. And that's it.
We shall see. Apparently, it's going to be released this week. Okay, so it will be interesting. Celtic Curio has commented on X, so just to show that we do bring up X comments. An afternoon to you as well. Anybody who wants last minute gifts for Christmas, I don't know when your last delivery date is, Celtic Curio, but check him out on X because he does some incredible prints. And in actual fact, as if by magic, I've got one here. In fact, John Hughes, who isn't on today, normally is on a Wednesday, Yogi's taking a wee break this week. He has a John Hughes senior one behind him. That was the latest one that I got from.
Lovely.
That. Beautiful bit of artwork. I need to get that framed up with all the others. Deck, great to see you on the YouTube. I hope we're not going to mention the Calmac quick free kick late in the game because the ball was moving, so he was right. Diamonde should have been booked for booting the ball away, though. That wasn't one of the three, but I know the one you're talking about where he's played Maida through, isn't he? And it seemed at the time that he was asked to take it again because he was in the wrong position, and they took it from the exact same position. But if you're saying it was the ball was moving, that's fine. It wasn't one that I had here. But what it does prove is that if you're going to start looking at one decision, let's look at them all. Let's look at all the decisions that the ref got wrong. Patrick, you mentioned Balogun, right? He was on a yellow card when he stamps. It's the only descriptive word I can come up with. He stamps on Rio on 49 minutes. He then kicks Carter Vickers on 62 minutes. Both of those infringements were punished with free kicks. So the referee said, yes, you have fouled the player. It's a free kick. And I know not every free kick is a booking. But in particular, the real one for me, I felt was a booking. So he's already on a yellow card. He got no second yellow card. I think did he not get hooked by Rangers after that?
I think eventually.
Aye,
seconds after he kicked Carter Vickers.
Yeah, he got hooked. So we could scrutinise that decision and say, why did Balogun not get a second yellow? The other one was, didn't notice it at the time, Carter Vickers was impeded at Rangers' second goal. Now, Carter Vickers has got this incredible ability, as he showed in the 4v1, to be able to get back and throw his body in front of balls and get, blocks in that don't seem possible, etc. And it's the one that goes to the back post that, had he not been impeded, he had a direct line to the back post. And he may have, because it's coulda, shoulda, woulda, right? He may have been able to stop the goal, but he was impeded at that point. Have a wee look at that. Nothing's been made of it. And the third one was a stamp on Kuhn by Jeff J. But by the way, it was blatant when you seen it.
Rake down, yeah.
43 minutes on the clock, and Kuhn gets an absolute dullion from behind, to the point where Kuhn goes down. And I don't think Kuhn is one of these players that goes down easily. He's quite a hardy wee guy for the size of him. So, if you're going to look at one decision, let's look at them all, because not every decision went Celtic's way. That was one decision that many believe went Celtic's way. What about the three that didn't? What about the three that went against Celtic? Patrick, this is the point. We could be here all day. We could go back to the Aberdeen decision in the League Cup final last season that barely got a mention. It certainly wasn't being scrutinised 3 days later, was it?
No. And you mentioned these decisions. I remember, I think it was Maeda on the break in the second half, and I think it might have been Balogun. I can't remember exactly, but blocking Kyogo off, holding him back, and then we sort of almost lose the ball. Kyogo sprints in, and he actually kicks Rangers player in the back of the leg. Kyogo gets the booking, and the guy that held him back about 10 seconds later, no booking at all. You've got one, I think I seen it on Twitter the other day, towards the end of the game, Carter Vickers knocks it off a Rangers player's leg, right in front of the linesman, and it's a Rangers throw-in.
Yep.
There were so many decisions throughout that game. The commenter brought it up 2-3 minutes ago. The amount of times they kicked the ball away when the referee stopped the game for a dead ball situation. Unbelievable how many times that happened throughout the game. Not once was a Rangers player even spoken to. Um, there were so many decisions. Obviously, it was 120 minutes of football, so there are going to be a lot of different decisions. But I thought the referee had a horrible game at the time, and then obviously in the days since, the focus has been on this sort of non-penalty. But I did think John Beaton had a poor game, and I think a lot of people have been criticised. There's a few screenshots of the John Hartson goal in the League Cup final 21 years ago. Why are you going back 21 years? That's been a lot of the criticism. But we've just spoken about the Hearts game in March, where Brendan came out and criticised John Beaton. So John Beaton was the referee, VAR was involved. You've then got the Fabio Silva dive at Ibrox. John Beaton was the referee, VAR was involved. And then you've got the first weekend of VAR being used in Scottish football. We go to Tynecastle. Forrest tries to play in a cross. Michael Smith, Hearts fullback, clearly handballs it. John Beaton's the referee, VAR's involved. 3 really contentious decisions in the last 2 years with that same pattern. And obviously Celtic came out and criticised John after the second Tynecastle game. But there are so many patterns where Celtic have been negatively affected, not necessarily against Rangers, but it's a pattern of poor refereeing. And as I've just said, I think it's a very weak case for a penalty in this case, and they're making a mountain out of a molehill. But I would agree that we do have poor referees in this country. But obviously, looking forward to Willie Collins' review, seeing what he actually has to say, as opposed to these leaks. It'll be interesting to see if that leak was true, because it tells us one way or another. Either journalists are making stuff up, or Rangers are really throwing the toys out of the pram and leaking stuff as soon as they get their hands on any information, and simply can't be trusted. But as just going back to the game, you're right. There are so many, maybe not as big as a penalty. Well, certainly in terms of Balogun, I think it actually is. Going down to 10 men, obviously would have a massive impact. But it's throughout the game, really, really small things that the refereeing team got totally wrong. Just factually wrong. Throw-ins, kicking the ball away. There's a lot of things that aren't being highlighted. You're absolutely spot on. That maybe obviously it's up to us to highlight these things, because other people aren't doing so.
No, you're right, and we'll continue to highlight them regardless of the amount of jibes we get for doing so. Tin Hat Brigade and all the rest of it, ready for the whole lot. Interestingly enough, when we're looking at these decisions, the biggest thing for me is the fact that we won the trophy, Chris, and we continue with the domination, which we've been speaking about all week. And it's not in a supremacist kind of fashion. We're talking about the domination of Scottish football. And I always go back to that, 2000, 2001 season when Martin O'Neill came in. I felt there was a real change in focus when it came to Celtic, and our approach, and the fact that up until that point, we'd obviously had the takeover. Fergus McCann, build a statue, name a stand, do everything you can regarding that wee guy. What he did for his football club is incredible. But he just wanted to get us basically firing on all cylinders as a business, really. Right, and as a result of that, yes, we got better. Yes, we stopped the 10. We won a trophy here or there, but we weren't great. I mean, there was no domination until Martin O'Neill comes in, and then since that point, 25 years now, we've got a whole generation of Celtic being the top dogs in Scottish football. Now, even mentioning that sometimes, Chris, people say to you, "Oh, is that all that matters? I mean, you're dominating a crap league in Scotland." Well, no, obviously not, but I'm not being funny, right? You can only play in the league that you're situated in, and by the way, there's no given. As my upbringing would suggest, there is no given that you're going to win the league, because we were dreadful, and we don't always win the league. There are occasions where, from time to time, someone else will win the league championship. So I take absolutely every bit of joy out of every single trophy, be that a League Cup, a League win, Scottish Cup.
Yeah.
And, I'm looking at the period of domination, Chris, and I'm thinking to myself, what happens next? What happens next, right? Because Celtic can't stand still. I think that you look at the Champions League campaign this season, and for me, it's been brilliant. Regardless of what happens, I think what it's shown us is that we can compete at that level. We can compete at that level with this newfangled Champions League group stage. Lawrence and I were talking yesterday about how it's as close to like a European Super League as we're probably going to get in the not too distant future. And Celtic are competing to the point where there's 2 games to go and we might qualify for a playoff. So that's progress. But in order to maintain that, what do we do? And I think that there's so many different things that we need to do as a business. We need to look at the infrastructure. We need to look at the stadium, rebuilding the main stand, increasing the capacity, giving guys like you who's been on a waiting list for God knows how long a season ticket, but also always looking on to the next transfer window and how to improve. And that leads me on. I read a story this morning. Dane Murray, he's a kid thrown in by Ange Postecoglou against Midtjylland, you'll remember, after Nir Bitton got sent off. And he starts the second game over in Switzerland. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Switzerland, is that right?
I think it was, yeah.
Is it not Denmark?
Denmark.
Was it Denmark?
I think.
Denmark,
Midtjylland,
yeah. I failed geography.
FC Midtjylland, yeah, because that was Shevchenko used to play for them, didn't he?
And Morten Rasmussen. And Dane Murray, after that, 2 years of absolute injury hell, comes back to Celtic, starts to regain his fitness. He's put out to Queen's Park, and apparently he's absolutely bossing it, Chris, to the point where there's a suggestion that he may be recalled in January. So we're now looking ahead to January. We're looking ahead to this progress that we're talking about, constantly improving.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this 2 ways, though. I'm looking at Dane Murray and thinking, right, we're bringing him back because of his performances, but are we also bringing him back because we have plans to move Stephen Welsh on? And we want to replace Welsh in the Champions League squad because there is a window to do that with someone like Dane Murray. Same position, homegrown player.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to the idea. I think it's. I thought it was great when we saw Dane Murray make an appearance after that injury layoff in pre-season. I thought it was great to see. I think we covered the game actually. He came on. It was a bit of a good news story. If he's doing the business at Queen's Park, bring him back. Let the manager have a look at him. I mean, I think we spoke about Cummings earlier. We spoke about the pathway for youth players to get an opportunity. I think we also have to show a degree of trust in the manager. You know, let's face it, he's doing the business in Europe and domestically this season, so we have to trust his judgment. If he feels that bringing a player like Dane Murray back to supplant, long-standing servant Stephen Welsh from the European squad, I'll trust and back the manager's decision on that. Stephen Welsh, a player that I've got a lot of time for. I just feel that he's maybe plateaued in terms of what he can offer us as a squad player at this point. I think we've seen the elevation of Carter Vickers, Trusty, and Scales at the back. I think it's a really difficult trio to try and break up or get yourself ahead of. I would like to see a youth player, a young player, come through and really challenge for maybe the 4th spot there, and be someone that can rotate in and out when required. So if that player is deemed to be Dane Murray by the manager, then great. I think it's something we have to. We talk about progress in all different areas of the club. Youth development and a pathway to get into the first team is going to be one of those areas that we have to look at. But you're right when you talk about what we've done this season in Europe. I think the format of the Champions League has changed in a way that no longer just benefits the so-called elite, and by elite I mean rich teams. What we're seeing now is we're actually seeing a bit more of a level playing field where the champions of all the respective nations are getting the opportunity to go in and show what they can do. And actually this season we've demonstrated that on our day we can compete, which is fantastic. We need to build on that in January, next summer, going forward. We're competing because we invested in the manager. We backed the manager in the transfer window with some big signings. I don't want to go into the Engels debate about whether he's living up to the price tag or not. I think he will, is my opinion. But the fact is the manager wanted players. He got them. He is evolving this squad into a team that I think has a bit of a Brendan Rodgers identity. And I think it's continually progressing, which is great. We should back that in terms of the academy, the infrastructure. We should make Celtic this kind of football entity that people sit up and take a look at. You know, the teams in Europe and the governing bodies in Europe take a look at. Celtic Park should be in the frame for example, for international European and world international tournaments. You know, it's look at what we've done with the Celtic Way. Build around the stadium, develop the area. You know, stop it looking like Little Beirut. Make it look actually like something that's you know, incredible. And actually, what that might do is it might make the rest of Scottish football take a look and say, okay, look, we don't have a profile of Celtic, we don't have the money or the finances, the resources, but look at some of the basics that the club are doing to progress. Let's cotton on to that. I think maybe Aberdeen have looked a little bit at that, and they're a good example. So, by virtue of progressing in Europe, progressing the way our club's evolving and really becoming one of these modern football entities, you hope that actually we will drag the rest of Scottish football up with us. And maybe instead of just having one team in the top table, we'll get two. Maybe we'll get, you know, the next tier down, we'll get a couple of teams in there and becoming more established. And actually Scotland will start to become more of a footballing powerhouse. Because to be honest, I'm fed up with this. It's a crap league. It's only a crap league when you're not playing in it or you can't win it, right? When you win it, suddenly it's the greatest tournament and the greatest league in the world. So, you know, not a crap league. It's the league that is aligned to the country we live in. And I'll back it to the hilt all the time. But we need to stop self-harming. We need to start looking at how do we progress to make ourselves, like we were in the 60s, a proper footballing nation.
The thing is, with the self-harm, that's my biggest concern, Chris, because you would think that the success of Celtic would rub off, as you say, in a downward way, and other clubs would even cash in on it, and they don't appear to be able to do that, unfortunately. Yeah. Here you go then, Patrick. I'm going to throw this one at you. We're talking about building a squad, fine-tuning the squad. Here are my bold predictions for January. This is what I would do. Every single time we get a transfer window, there's a list of players that I think need to be offloaded. So here we go, right? And all but one of them is due to the fact that I don't think they have a place in the first team. And I'll explain that when I come to it. So the first two players are Welsh and Nawrocki. I think that those two guys, centre-halves, Nawrocki's played 9 minutes of football this season. These guys are not going to form part of Brendan Rodgers' back line. They just are not, right? So move them on and bring one in. Bring one in. So what we did with Trusty, do that again on the other side so that we have four centre-halves and any of the four of them could be rotated. Carter Vick is always going to be the best, but any of the four of them could be rotated. Similarly, in the midfield, right? Holm and Kwon. Remember Kwon? He's at Hibs. Move them on, the two of them. Get rid of them. They're never going to form part of Brendan Rodgers' midfield. It's not going to happen, right? Move them on and then bring one in. And I know that obviously Lennon Miller has been mentioned in dispatches. Similarly, on the wings, Palma and Yang, nothing personal. They're not going to form part of Brendan Rodgers' team. Get rid of them and bring one in. And I've seen that Michel Ange Balakwisha, who was mentioned in the summer, his name is getting mentioned again. He plays for Royal Antwerp. He's a left-sided winger. And I think that's what we need because Forrest at the moment is covering fairly well on the right-hand side. And the one controversial one might be at left-back. I think Bernabe, move him on. Taylor, move him on because he's not going to get the contract that he wants. And bring one left-back in. I'm not going to mention him. The KT Clarkson will not be sounded. But bring one in. So move on 2 centre-halves, 2 left-backs, 2 midfielders and 2 wingers and bring one in each of the positions, one of quality. And I think, Patrick, when you look at that as a squad, yeah, it's a smaller squad, but you're going to have guys in there that you actually think could step into the fray and make a contribution.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of guys there. Obviously, to do all that in January, I think would be quite difficult, but there's a lot of guys there that you mentioned that quite obviously aren't going to make it. I think the centre-halves are quite obvious. Welsh is there, he's Scottish, he's homegrown, so there's a bit of a caveat, but Nawrocki, I mean, it's just not going to happen, is it? There's no way that's going to happen. In the midfield, again, Holm, I thought he looked promising, I thought he looked an okay player, but the last 12 months, you're hard pressed to actually think of a game where he came on, never mind when he started. I think Yang and Palma, you're definitely going to get rid of one. It looks like Palma's the most likely at this stage. I think if you're going to bring in guys of real quality, I think you're probably right in getting rid of Yang as well. Yeah, I was going to say the bright spark. He had a bright, 10 seconds against Bruges when he sort of turned into Messi for 10 seconds. Started playing classic tiki-taka football in that right wing. But I think he would need to show more. Again, with the young guys, maybe I'm being a bit too sympathetic here, but Home and Yang could maybe benefit from a loan move. I think Kwon has shown that he's of a level where he can play in Scotland, he can play at that level, but obviously we're wanting something better than that. McCowan's came in, he's played at a Scottish level, and he's reached a Celtic level, you would say, quite comfortably. Kwon's never really been there. So I think you're right in getting rid of him. And it would be good to get guys of real quality in these positions. I think on the wings, I think it should be straightforward enough. I think we've only got 2 wingers of real quality. For Forrest, you can sort of trust. He comes in and he does a job. Yang and Palmer, it's a total lottery. More often than not, you're losing. You can't trust him at all. And then left back, the situation is obviously quite precarious. As you say, get Valley. Again, for a reasonable fee, I wouldn't mind to see us sign him. Taylor, I'd like to be in a fly in the wall in the next round of negotiations because he's playing himself into a lower wage than a higher one at the moment. Obviously, we've discussed last week. He wants an upgraded contract. Good luck with that. I think the longer that drags on, I think the more likely he is to leave. And we need certainty going into next season. We're going to be playing a playoff. We're going to be looking for that Champions League money again. You were saying there about competing in the Champions League. I think my disappointment personally from Bruges and Zagreb, I thought they were winnable games if we played better. And next season, when you look at the likes of Leipzig, I mean, really unfortunate with their draw, but they're sitting on 0 points. And in theory, we could have a really challenging draw next season. So as much as the format, I think, benefits us, I don't think it's a sure thing that we're going to get the 10, 12 points next season and get those extra 2 games. So we still need to strengthen so that we're in a position where we're not even thinking about qualifiers. Maybe a slight concern, but back in the day, 5, 6 years ago, you're thinking, God, these are the biggest games of our season. I want us to be at a level where the qualifiers aren't even an issue. We're in the Champions League. As long as we win the league, we're getting to the Champions League. And even with a slightly tougher draw than this season, we're looking at getting to that 10 points and getting the playoff round. Because we were fortunate with a good draw this year. We've all got to be honest about that. But I still think the aim should be at 10 points. And what you've outlined there, getting rid of the deadwood and bringing in players of real quality, just 1 or 2 more, because we've got a good core starting 11 with 1 or 2 extras. But to add to that, I think that has to be the priority going forward, so that we can guarantee that cash. I mean, the revenue we're bringing in just now, I think 125 million. That's actually going to go up with these added games when the accounts are released next September. And to guarantee that money, you have to go out and spend.
Yeah, without a doubt. And January will be here before you know it. We've obviously got Christmas prior to that as well. That'll be in a week, something like that. But before then, the Centenary boys will be joining us tomorrow night at Barra's Art and Design, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'll ask Roy Aiken about the last decision that went Celtic's way in a game against Rangers, that throw-in, of course, in 1989. Which shattered their treble dream. There's a handful of tickets left, I think 17 tickets left. And if you want to come along, then the link is underneath this video. And if you fire in the little code there, the wee Christmas code, Acsom 1888, then you can get 50% off your ticket. Can't say any fairer than that. Thank you, every single one of you, for getting involved. It's been a busy one, 1700 strong. And thank you once again to Patrick McGill and also to Chris McElwain for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.